This week, a major U.S. insurance company said they would no longer sell insurance in the hurricane-prone state of Florida. This comes just as two other insurance companies stopped selling home insurance in California due to wildfire risks. Canada is no stranger to natural disasters. This week, we saw floods, tornadoes, and of course, more wildfires burning. So will we meet the same fate as some of our southern neighbors, seeing insurance providers pull out of certain regions or provinces? To help us answer that question, let's bring in Jason Thistlethwaite. He's a professor for the School of Environment, Enterprise and Development at the University of Waterloo, and he joins us now from Dundas, Ontario. Good morning, Jason. Overall, what do you think? Will we see insurance companies pull out of certain regions in Canada?
Well, it's already happening, but not in the same way in the United States. So for the longest time, for instance, in Canada, there was no such thing as overland flood insurance or insurance to cover water coming up over riverbanks or on a coastline. So there already is a precedent in the country for insurance not being available for certain perils. It's just not going to be the same way in the U.S. as you're seeing it pull out of, for instance, a state or a region. So it just looks a little different. Floodplains, for instance, are very hard to obviously acquire flood insurance for. So it's already happening here, but not exactly in the same way.
And I understand there's some factors that make the Florida and California insurance markets different than ours in Canada. So tell me about that.
Sure. So in those states, there's some more regulation that influences how insurers can price their products. And if those products become too expensive, then yeah, insurers are looking at options to exit the marketplace there. Where we don't have those regulations in place, insurers have more flexibility here to be able to price things. So the example would be, instead of not offering coverage in Canada, you would just see the prices be cost prohibitive. So it's very similar. But and another big factor I would say in Canada is that, particularly when it comes to wildfire, we don't have the same levels of exposure. So in a place like California, you've got a lot of population density right up against the sources of fuel, whereas our population is a little bit more scattered. So a bit of a better situation in Canada, but certainly we're starting to see emerging trends in the insurance industry here, where insurers are pulling away from coverage because it's just too costly to keep insuring the country as a result of climate change, the cost of high costs of reconstructing property, aging infrastructure, and generally poor development that's encouraging people to develop in high-risk areas.
So, Jason, what ultimate impact does this have on Canadian homeowners?
Ultimately, higher prices, more out of your pocket. So, that's unfortunate, because we actually know the solutions to be able to, rather than have insurance contract, but we know the solutions that we need to use to expand it. The first of which is we need to democratize data on risk and flood risk, climate change risk, wildfire risk across the country, to be able to empower communities and homeowners to understand what measures they can take to improve the quality of the insurance market by reducing risk. With that information, communities ought to be able to identify high-risk locations, leverage government money from upper-tier governments like the province and the federal government, and target investments in risk reduction. That information, along with investments in things like preventing risk before it materializes, are ways that we can actually expand the insurance markets in Canada, rather than their current situation, which is contraction.
Now, the government has taken steps to mitigate the impact of extreme weather, dedicating money from the 2023 budget to improving infrastructure and mapping areas where disaster is most likely to strike. But do you think these are steps in the right direction?
Yes, the government absolutely should be applauded for several initiatives. A concentrated investment in a flood mapping portal, bringing maps together, for instance. So this is flooding is Canada's most costly and common hazard, but we're very much in the dark about where the risk is. If we can have a better conversation between governments, between sectors, even at the property level about where the risk is, we can then actually just start doing something about it. They're also investing in a low-cost flood insurance option, which is another important solution. Insurance plays an important role in the functioning of the economy because it sends a risk signal that it can encourage different types of behavior. So when developers and communities see, for instance, that insurance is cost prohibitive or expensive, that sends a signal that we ought to be doing things to reduce that risk. So I absolutely do think the government can be applauded for taking some steps in the right direction. But the devil is going to be in the details on these things, and we ultimately need to see these maps so sooner as opposed to later. I think is something we need to see happen.